Welcome to a series where we talk about the World Cup histories of each nation at the 2026 World Cup. Today we'll be talking about the most famous co-host in World Cup history, as well as the Asian nation with the deepest history at the World Cup. South Korea, officially Korea Republic, has a history filled with stars and skillers, but they often play the role of mystical underdogs at the World Cup, making them a terrifying team to see drawn into your group. Let's get into that history and talk about perhaps the most controversial run in the history of the World Cup. When the first World Cup was held in 1930, Korea was already a part of the Japanese Empire, and thus we wouldn't have an independent Korean team at any relevant point for our video. Because by the time World War II ended and World Cups were back on the menu, now the Korean War was a thing, and Korea became the most insane case of haves and have-nots in geopolitical history. The high-tech, westernized South Koreans that we're talking about, and the insular, impoverished North Koreans that obviously did not make the tournament this year. South Korea would not let the Korean War bring them down. This is a country that will develop a pretty underrated sportsman culture, and they would enter qualification for Switzerland 1954. Asian soccer was pretty sparse at this point in time, and India and Vietnam were both not allowed to enter. Taiwan would also withdraw from qualification, leaving just South Korea and their hated rivals Japan to contend for the qualifying spot. Things were so tense between these two nations that South Korea's president straight up refused to let Japanese players inside their borders, and so both matches were played in Tokyo. A 5-1 Korean win in the first leg wrapped things up. South Korea would win the playoffs 7-3. And they would qualify to their first ever World Cup shockingly early on in the tournament's history. We regard South Korea as a pretty new power in soccer, but here they are qualified for the 5th World Cup ever held. At Switzerland 1954, South Korea would be drawn into a group with Hungary, West Germany, and Turkey, and they were doomed from the get-go. Hungary's 1954 team is one of the strongest in the history of international soccer, and the magnificent Magyars had their way with the South Koreans to the tune of 9-0. This is tied for the biggest blowout in World Cup history, and it's hard to see that record being broken anytime soon. The Koreans would recover nicely from this, and then their second game against Turkey, they only lost 7-0 this time, and that left South Korea with perhaps the worst table results in World Cup history. This is shockingly horrible, but there's nowhere to go but up from this point, so that's the good news. For Sweden 1958, Africa and Asian had to split one spot at the World Cup, and it didn't even matter for South Korea because they didn't mail their application to join qualifying in time. That's a hilarious reason to miss out on the World Cup. The South Korean FA was on that Elvis Doomerville fax machine nonsense. Chile 1962 saw South Korea compete for a spot in the Intercontinental Playoffs against just Japan. A little bit of deja vu here. South Korea would win a close game in Seoul in the first leg, and they won 2-0 in Tokyo to move on to those Intercontinental Playoffs, where they would play Yugoslavia. It was over after the first leg, where the Yugoslavs dropped 5 on the Koreans in Belgrade, put 3 more on them in Seoul, and South Korea comes up just short as a result. England 1966 qualifying was a mess. They once again forced Africa and Asia to split one spot, and the entire continent of Africa boycotted the World Cup as a result. Qualifying was moved from Japan to Cambodia, and this was just too much for South Korea, who would withdraw from qualifying as a result. I don't know how much truth there is to this rumor, but it's always been said that South Korea did this as a way to duck North Korea, who had easily their best team of all time, and would go on to prove that in England with their incredible upset of Italy. Qualifying for Mexico 1970 saw Africa finally split off from Asia and Oceania, and this is the beginning to resemble a real qualifying zone as a result. South Korea would be drawn in a double round robin with Japan and Australia, with the winner advancing to a playoff, and South Korea finished second, dropping the game at home against Australia that they needed to win, and thus we saw the Socceroos advance at South Korea's expense. West Germany 1974 had a very strange qualifying for Asia, with the teams of Asia and Oceania being split into 2 zones, each zone having multiple groups and a knockout stage, and then the winners of the 2 zones playing in a playoff. There's a surprisingly involved process going on here. South Korea would initially be drawn with Thailand, Malaysia, and Israel, random group, but they advanced out of this group in second place. Then they reached a playoff where they beat Hong Kong on one side of the bracket, and Israel beat Japan on the other side, and that set up a rematch. This game was also 0-0 after 90 minutes, but a young Cha Bum-kun would find a winner in extra time to send South Korea to the final playoff for the World Cup. Here, they would rematch with Australia, where they drew the first game, drew the second game, and after all of this, they would play a third game in neutral Hong Kong, where South Korea would lose 1-0, falling just short of making it back to international soccer's grandest stage. Pick yourselves up because it's time for Argentina 1978, the most positive World Cup ever. South Korea would be drawn into a group with Israel, Japan, and freaking North Korea. It's the all-grudge match group, but predictably North Korea would pull out due to being in the same group as Israel. Interesting. I don't know. It simplified things for South Korea, so it doesn't really matter. 0-0 draws in Tokyo and Tel Aviv, 2 wins in Seoul. That allowed South Korea to win the group and reach one final double round robin group, where the winner would book their ticket to Argentina. Hong Kong served as the piñata for the rest of the group, but South Korea would only manage a 0-0 draw and a loss against Australia, and that was the end for the Koreans. 2 draws against Iran failed to curb the superior results from Team Melli, who grabbed the Asian qualifying spot at South Korea's expense. That was painful. Let's move on to qualifying for España 1982, where South Korea began in a single round-robin group with Malaysia, Thailand, and Kuwait. The Tigers would have no issue with the first two, but a 2-0 loss in Kuwait City eliminated South Korea then and there. Kuwait would end up with Asia's automatic spot, which makes this loss look less bad in hindsight, but what a flop of a qualifying campaign. There is light on the other side of the tunnel, of course, because South Korea football takes off like a rocket at this point. Qualifying for Mexico 1986 saw Asia get a second automatic spot, and due to the way the region was split up for this new format, South Korea would not have to play anyone from the Middle East, an arguably superior soccer region. Their initial group with Malaysia and Nepal looked easy, but a loss in Kuala Lumpur put the Koreans in a hole they wouldn't climb out of until beating the Malaysians in the return leg to barely pip the group. This put South Korea into the semifinals of a playoff where they would play Indonesia, and after a unconvincing 2-0 win in Seoul, they would drop 4 goals on Team Garuda in Jakarta to easily advance to the final. A win-in playoff against who else but Japan. The Reds would win the first game in Tokyo, and after taking care of business at home in the return leg, they've finally done it. South Korea is finally back in the World Cup. Having made it to Mexico and by all means accomplishing their goals, the South Koreans will get hit with the wombo combo in the draw, ending up in the same group as the defending champions Italy, as well as the previous winners and, spoilers, the eventual 1986 winners as well, Argentina. Third place advancement was on the menu thanks to the 24-team field, but South Korea would be scrapping with Bulgaria for that spot. South Korea would open against Argentina, which is only slightly less rough than having to open with the magnificent Magyars at their first World Cup, but still, as good as guys like Sandor Kocsis and Ferenc Puskás were, now South Korea was going to have to play against fucking Diego Maradona. Their ingenious idea of how to play against Maradona was to foul the absolute shit out of him. I have a hard time feeling bad for the Argentines here considering their reputation, but apparently karma didn't feel the same. Not only would Argentina score their first goal off a set piece conceded by a Korean foul, but they'd do it a second time and get a 2-0 lead before 20 minutes. Maradona would hurt them again coming out of halftime and assisting on Jorge Valdano's second goal of the game, and while South Korea wouldn't be able to come back from that deficit, Park Chang-soon would score the first ever World Cup for South Korea for what would end up being consolation. Final score 3-1 Argentina. The middle match here would be against Bulgaria, and this was important for South Korea if they wanted any chance to reach the knockouts. This desperation, combined with the massive rainstorm that bogged down the entire pitch, made this game a tough watch. And for South Korea, it got even tougher when their goalie messed up his clearance and allowed Bulgaria to take the lead. South Korea would amp up the pressure from here and eventually break through the second half to equalize, and they'd hold on for the 1-1 draw. The bright side here is that the draw gave South Korea their first ever World Cup point, but the downside is that they really needed the win and now needed a result against the Italians. Deja vu happened for South Korea when Italy scored early thanks to another blunder from South Korea's goalkeeper, but then something funny happened. South Korea would concede a penalty, but Altobelli stepped up and hit the post, and this allowed for the Koreans to remain in the game down 1-0 heading into halftime. After absorbing a bit more pressure, the Koreans would equalize out of nowhere when Choi Sun-hoo hit a really nice goal. The Taeguk Warriors really proved something down in Mexico, but they would unfortunately fall behind again when Altobelli took advantage of poor Korean defending. And more bad defending led to a Korean own goal and a 3-1 lead for the Azzurri. The Koreans wouldn't give up, putting pressure on the Italian defense and eventually getting rewarded for it when Hoo Jung-moo got behind the defense and made it 3-2. At this point, a third goal for Korea would have gotten them through to the knockouts and eliminated Bulgaria, but they were unable to do it. The boys would leave Mexico with their heads held high and their dignity intact, but without too much to actually show for it. South Korea would attempt to up the ante ahead of their qualification campaign for Italian 90. They breezed through their first group, winning each game by at least 3 goals, keeping a clean sheet in each game, and beating Nepal fucking 9-0. This got them into the final group, the Not Hex, and they just needed to finish in the top 2 to book their spot at the World Cup. After drawing their first game against Qatar, the team would churn out good wins against North Korea, China, and Saudi Arabia to book their spot before the 5th game even took place. They would be drawn in a group with Belgium, Spain, and Uruguay for the World Cup, and this is another tough draw for the South Koreans. In their first game against Belgium, the Tigers of Asia would go into halftime dead even, but when the South Korean goalie came out to contest a long ball, Marc de Gries would beat him to it and score one of those funny empty net goals to give Belgium the lead. Belgian defender Michel de Wolf would make it 2-0 on an even better goal. I really don't blame the Korean goalie for getting beat near post here because what the fuck. And the Red Devil defense declawed the Asian Tiger attack for pretty much the entire game from here. Game 2 against Spain was always going to be tough, and to give South Korea credit, they fought once again. Michel scored an early goal for La Roja, but South Korea would create an equalizer out of nowhere with an impressive free kick from Hwang Bo-kwan right before halftime. I'll just say right now, if you're of legal drinking age and watching this at an appropriate time, you should absolutely be taking a shot every time the Koreans score a direct free kick goal in this video. This put the pressure on Spain again, who would answer in the second half with a free kick goal of their own, with Michel hitting directly from 20 yards out for his brace. Michel would find a third goal to record a hat-trick and seal the game in favor of Spain. The Koreans had one foot out the tournament and now needed to not only beat Uruguay, but get a lot of help to advance. South Korea versus Uruguay was a desperate, brutal game where both teams knew they needed to win and played accordingly, with especially the Uruguayans playing extremely dirty. Neither team could find a breakthrough in regulation, and it took until stoppage time for South Korea to finally bend, with a free kick from Alfonso Dominguez finding Daniel Fonseca in the box for the header and the late winner to send Los Celestes to the knockouts and end South Korea's World Cup with 0 points at the bottom of the group. South Korea's quest to quit being piñatas of the World Cup starts with making it back, and the journey began in a qualifying group with Bahrain, Lebanon, Hong Kong, and India. This was no issue at all for Korea, who scored 23 and conceded just 1 in 8 games. This got them to the Asian Mini-Hex, a 6-team single-round robin group that this year included Japan, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, and the bloody North Koreans. In a group where the top 2 advanced, nobody ever pulled away in this group. South Korea started with a huge 3-0 win over Iran, but drew with Iraq and Saudi Arabia in their next 2 games. Still, after 3 games, they sat in one of the 2 qualifying spots along with Saudi Arabia at the top, but they would blow that with a 1-0 loss to their bitter rivals, Japan. This puts Samurai Blue in the top 2 along with the Green Falcons, and the Taeguk Warriors were now looking up with 1 game left against their neighbors, North Korea. South Korea did their best. They won 3-0 against North Korea, and even though Saudi Arabia won to clinch their spot in the World Cup, Japan would concede late against Iraq and draw 2-2. They completely fucked it up. They were now tied with South Korea on points, and goal difference favored the Koreans. It was over. For the Japanese, this day is known as the Agony of Doha. It is to this day the last time Japan missed out on the World Cup. For South Korea, of course, this is known as the Miracle of Doha. Spoiler alerts, but this is the closest South Korea has come to missing the World Cup in the last 40 years. They qualified for their 3rd straight World Cup by surviving this campaign, and with the tournament expanding to 32 teams for 1998, South Korea would continue to make it regularly as one of the best teams in Asia. Now we just need to work on winning the Asian Cup because they haven't won the event since 1960 and somehow didn't qualify for the 1992 Asian Cup after losing to Thailand. In the States, the South Koreans would be drawn in a group with Spain again, the holders Germany, and Bolivia. This is a strange group, but they would kick off with an opportunity for revenge against Spain, though, who had beaten them 4 years ago to the day of kickoff. The Cotton Bowl in Dallas saw a scoreless first half, but a scorching second half. The Koreans more than held their own in the Texan heat, thanks in part to an early Spanish red card, but Spain scored early in the second half on some bad Korean defending, and that looked like it would sink South Korea once again. Spain scored a second goal just a few minutes later when Choi In-young denied both Julio Salinas and Jose Luis Caminero, but Jan Andoni Goicoechea was there to head in the double rebound and put Spain up 2-0. Looking down and out all the way until the end, some free kick trickery got South Korea a goal back in the 85th minute courtesy of Hung Myung-mo, but they were still fucked, right? Well, the Spanish defense let Seo Jung-won shoot in the box unmarked, and in the 90th minute, he would beat Santiago Cañizares for a shock equalizer. South Korea earned a point against a world-class team, their best ever result in a World Cup up to this point. They were now going into their second game in Boston with some real momentum, knowing a win against Bolivia would almost certainly put them through to the knockouts for the very first time. South Korea had yet to win a World Cup game up to this point, but if they were going to do it, Bolivia was a good team to strive to do it against. The 2 teams were theoretically even, and La Verde was missing their best player, the great Marco Echeverri. With all the opportunity in the world, South Korea completely shit the bed. Bolivia looked like the better team for most of this game until Luis Cristaldo was sent off with a few minutes to go. At this point, the Koreans finally got some wind behind their sails, getting a few good opportunities to poach a late winner, but Carlos Turco held them out of goal every time. The game finished 0-0, a huge blown chance for South Korea because now they had to get a result against Germany to feel good about moving forward. That's a bad spot to be. Back at the Cotton Bowl for Game 3, South Korea was in a can't-lose situation and instead immediately went down 3-0. Jurgen Klinsmann scored a great scissor kick to put the Germans in the lead in the 12th minute, and by halftime he had scored a second. Karl-Heinz Riedel had scored as well, and the game was already over. Except it wasn't. Hwang Sung-hong would get one back early in the second half, but then Hong Myung-bo rocketed a shot from 25 plus yards out, and now it's 3-2 with like 30 minutes of gameplay remaining. The Koreans would continue to push for an incredible equalizer, but they weren't able to do it. The Koreans would finish with 2 points and a narrow loss, a very credible effort by this national team, and their best performance of the World Cup yet. Unfortunately, even though they finished third place in a World Cup where 4 of the 6 third place teams went through the knockouts, South Korea finished in dead last in the third place table and was going home as a result. In 1996, the bidding to host the 2002 World Cup took place, and South Korea was ready to host the world's biggest team sporting event. They would submit their bid, and their main competitors were Japan and Mexico. With the Mexicans trying to host for the third time now, the competition would come down to the two Asian rivals. And if you want to hear about all the political dealings and everything, there are other sources for this, and I have 44 videos to make after this. At the end of the day, South Korea and Japan were essentially forced to co-host the event, which I didn't realize at the time how monumental and awkward this was, but hey, it's happening now. Let's prepare with the France 98 cycle. Qualification began in a 3-team group with Thailand and Hong Kong, and despite the Thais getting a draw in one of their 2 games, South Korea was able to win the other, get revenge for Asian Cup 92, and move on to the final group. Here they would end up in a double round robin with their fellow 2002 co-host Japan, along with Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, and the United Arab Emirates. In this group, they absolutely cooked, losing their penultimate game to Japan, but basically already having first place wrapped up by then. The Koreans would finish on 19 points of 24, 6 ahead of Japan, and easily going back to the World Cup. In France, South Korea would get an odd draw. They'd get both low countries, the Netherlands out of pot 1 and Belgium as well, along with Mexico out of North America. This was a pretty balanced World Cup group, all things considered. They got Germany and Spain at the last World Cup, and as good as this Dutch team was in '98, it might not have been as good as either one of those teams. You'd still expect South Korea to be at the bottom of this group, but you'd have to think they'd have a chance here, right? Well, they opened in Lyon against Mexico, and this certainly started well. South Korea scored off a free kick from Ha Seok-ju that deflected off a Mexican defender's head, but then just a few minutes later, he himself got sent off for a tackle on Ramon Ramirez from behind, so yikes. South Korea would hold a 1-0 lead until halftime, but it all came apart after that. Ricardo Pelaez scored just a few minutes after halftime to equalize, then took the lead on a short-range finish from Luis Hernandez, and doubled that lead at 3-1 on a longer range. Nice shot from Luis Hernandez. This was a decent effort for the Koreans, but the red card doomed them, and they win another games against the Low Countries in some dire straits. Game 2 in Marseille against the Netherlands also started well, in that it was scoreless for the first 36 minutes of the game. And then Philip Cocu scored, and then Marc Overmars scored right after that, and then 3 more Dutch players scored in the second half. This ass-beating was so bad that not only did it eliminate South Korea from the World Cup with a day to go, but they literally fired their coach, Cha Bum-kun, mid-World Cup. They literally just had a Poland-esque game of honor left, and they said, "We don't want you around anymore. We're letting some dude named Kim Pyong-seok manage the final game." It's easy to make fun of the FA for this decision. It's objectively funny, but let's examine the result in Paris against Belgium. The Red Devils did score immediately on a corner that bounced around until Luke Nilis put the ball into the back of the net 7 minutes into the game. The Koreans held on, though, with a desperate Belgium team unable to add to their lead. That came back to bite them too, because the Tigers created more magic from a free kick with Ha Seok-ju hitting it into the box and finding Yoo Sang-chul for the finish and the equalizer. The Koreans would hold on to the 1-1 draw and ensure they didn't go out of the World Cup with 0 points, and they managed to play spoiler as well, eliminating Belgium and doing Mexico a favor for the first time, certainly not the last. We move on to Korea-Japan 2002 now, a tournament that was quite a shit show in a few ways, but not due to the hosts. I think this is one of the most universally agreed upon positive hosts of the World Cup, with the co-host situation being the most controversial part of the whole process. Never mind, that's a lie. It's actually South Korea's on-field run at their own World Cup here that is the most controversial part, as we will detail here holy shit. We started in a group where the Koreans were drawn with Portugal, a European team on the rise, as well as a second European team in Poland, and one of the few teams that had a worse 1998 World Cup than South Korea with the United States. The Portuguese were seen here as the clear favorites to go through, with probably Poland as the main competition for second place against the co-hosts. That's who South Korea would start this adventure off with, a match in Busan against the Poles. This game was kind of wild because South Korea played Poland off the pitch. They scored in the 26th minute when Lee Yul-yong found Hwang Sun-hong unmarked in the box for a 1-0 Korean lead, and they would hold this lead until halftime. After the break, the Koreans would cement their victory with Yoo Sang-chul beating Jersey Dudek from outside the box on a shot that Dudek got to and should have saved, but only put further into the corner of his own net. If anyone was more likely to score from here, it would have been the Koreans adding onto their lead, but the game did end up finishing 2-0 South Korea. The Poles looked dreadful, and this was a huge result towards getting South Korea to the knockouts. More than that, though, this was South Korea's first ever World Cup win, so if nothing else, they would be leaving their World Cup at home, with that at least. Next up was the United States in Daegu, and somehow this US team had just beaten Portugal in their first game, so this was the unlikely battle of group leaders here. The US would score first in front of the hostile Korean crowd when John O'Brien found Clint Matheson acres of space on the edge of the box, and the man with the big dumb mohawk was able to finish. South Korea got a great opportunity to equalize when big dumb Jeff Agoos committed a foul in the box, but Lee Yul-yong saw his attempt saved by Brad Friedel and the rebound sent wide to keep the Koreans off the board going in halftime. The second half saw the Koreans chase their equalizer. They thought they got it when Seo Ki-hyun had Friedel one-on-one, but it was once again saved by the goalie, who was having an amazing game. But South Korea did finally get their equalizer in the 78th minute. It was a set-piece goal, but An Jung-hwan rose highest to head home, finally beating Friedel and celebrating with the famous speed skating celebration / US diss. This game would finish 1-1, which was a missed opportunity for South Korea, but did keep them in the hunt for a spot at the next round. South Korea's final group game was in Incheon against Big Bad Portugal, who had rebounded from that shock loss to the US by destroying Poland. This game was surprisingly even through the first half, up until the 27th minute when Joao Pinto viciously brought down Park Ji-sung and was sent off with a straight red. The game remained scoreless until halftime, after which the game picked up a bit of steam and both teams looked more threatening. Naturally, this is when Beto gets himself sent off with a second yellow, and immediately after this, Park Ji-sung introduced himself to the world.
Here's Lee Yong-pyo. Cross here for Park Ji-sung. Oh, that's clever! He's done it! Korea lead!
This is almost Bergkamp-esque. I had never seen anyone talk about this game, but it is such a beaut. It put South Korea in the lead, and against a 9-man team, even one as good as Portugal's, it was over from here. Sergio Conceição had the best chance for Portugal. He damn near made up for being mugged by Park Ji-sung on that goal, but hit the inside of the post and it didn't go in. It was South Korea's night. There was controversy about this win, mostly coming from Beto's second yellow card that brought Portugal down to 9 men, but from my eyes, there's nothing here that really sticks out compared to what's about to come. South Korea was relatively cleanly through to the knockouts as group winners. Normally as group winners, you get somebody weak in the round of 16, but instead, South Korea drew Italy. The game in Daejeon started with South Korea immediately earning a pretty dodgy penalty off Christian Panucci. An Jung-hwan stepped up, his penalty was okay, but Gigi Buffon got to it and saved it. This was a big blown opportunity for South Korea, their second missed pen of the tournament. They would pay for it just a few minutes later when Francesco Totti put a corner into the box and found Christian Vieri for a header and a goal. Italy led 1-0 at halftime, and the game remained here for much of the second half. The Koreans tried desperately for an equalizer, while the defense, and particularly goalie Lee Hwoon-jae, kept the Italians further out of goal. This holding pattern remained for a while, but time was running out and it looked like the Korean fight was going to go unrewarded. And then in the 88th minute, Italian defender Christian Panucci made his second devastating mistake of the match, and this time he gave the ball straight away to Seo Ki-hyun, who then beat Buffon to find a late equalizer. Vieri missed a golden opportunity, Korea damn near found a winner, and a frantic final few minutes of regulation ended without the game being settled. We went to extra time from here where things started coming up South Korea. Lee Yul-yong sent a free kick under the jumping Italian wall and damn near beat Buffon, and then just a minute later, Totti went down in the Korean box. He was trying to get a cheap penalty call, and instead he picked up a yellow card for diving. This was Totti's second yellow, he was sent off, and the match had now descended into what Italian fans would call a complete farce. This was the third or fourth dodgy and significant decision that had gone South Korea's way. It's just a little suspicious, especially when you consider this referee will be banned for life from the sport and eventually put in jail for international drug smuggling. The 10-man Italians tried to hang on, and Gennaro Gattuso damn near won it for Italy one-on-one with the keeper before Lee Woon-jae made another great save. In the 117th minute though, with penalties looming, Lee Young-pyo would send a cross into the box that An Jung-hwan would rise to for the header, beating the great Paolo Maldini for it, and got it past Gigi Buffon for the golden goal, the winner that would put South Korea miraculously through to the quarterfinals. This was a devastating loss for Italy, who are still pissed about this one to this day, but the co-hosts were controversially moving on to the quarters, where they would meet Spain. We move to Gwangju, where if it's possible, we've run into an even more controversial game. The first half was dull, with Spain getting all the opportunities but converting none of them to keep the game at 0-0 going into the second 45. Immediately to start the second half, Spain would find their goal through a header from Ruben Baraja to put them in the lead. Except no, the goal was disallowed for pushing. Fernando Morientes was the guilty man, I guess, but man, I do not see it. Both teams had opportunities after this, but none hit. With the disallowed goal, the game was still at 0-0, and for the second straight game for the co-hosts, we went to extra time. Just a couple minutes in, Spain should have ended it. Joaquin dribbled into the box, he kept the ball in bounds the whole time, then sent in the perfect cross to Morientes, who was able to beat Lee Woon-jae in goal to score the golden goal and win it for La Roja. Except no, the goal was disallowed because the ball apparently went out of bounds before Joaquin even crossed it in. If you look at the replay, I've got it on the screen right now, not only does the ball not go out of bounds, it doesn't even go particularly close to out of bounds. In soccer, the entire ball has to cross the line out, but barely any of it does. This isn't even close, this is some bullshit. I'm not even particularly a Spanish football fan, but they got fucking hosed here. The game finished 0-0 and went to penalties, where the first 3 takers for each team hit before Lee Woon-jae easily saved Joaquin's hesitant pen. Maybe he was afraid it would get called out of bounds. Hong Myung-bo coolly stepped up and made it 5 for 5 as South Korea won the shootout and moved on to the semifinals. I'm of the opinion that Italian soccer fans are kind of lame talking about being robbed in the round of 16 because while they were the victim of some bad calls, they ultimately did do that shit to themselves, at least a little bit. I'm more sympathetic to Spain's argument here. They straight up should have won. They put the ball in the back of the net twice and had both called out. They should have been in the semis with a winnable game, but they'd have to wait 8 years before getting the monkey off their back. So yeah, South Korea is somehow now onto the semifinals of the entire World Cup. When coming in, they had never even won a game at the tournament. There was all kinds of controversy around this run, but they would go back to Seoul and face one of the weakest German national teams ever, with a chance to go all the way to the World Cup final. This is insane. This game in Seoul, this epic semifinal that I know I would have been so hyped for, ended up being a little bit of a dud. The Germans were the better team in this game from the jump, and while the Koreans would have a few chances on the counter, it was Michael Ballack who made the difference in the 75th minute when he got his own rebound and put it past Lee Woon-jae. The Koreans were unable to find their equalizer, and this game ended 1-0, with the Germans moving on to be perhaps the worst team to ever play in a World Cup final, denying South Korea from undoubtedly holding that title instead. South Korea, of course, still had the chance to grab a medal, playing against fucking Turkey in the weirdest third-place match in World Cup history. The game started with Korea kicking off, Hong Myung-bo immediately getting robbed for the ball, and Hakan Şükür finishing past Lee Woon-jae for a Turkish goal literally 11 seconds into the match. It's the fastest World Cup goal ever, but it set the tone for a frantic match. South Korea wouldn't have to wait long for their equalizer, with Lee Yul-yong hitting an awesome free kick above the wall and upper 90 past Rüstü Resper. The Turks immediately hit back, though, scoring in the 13th minute through Ilhan Menzies, and him doubling his tally in the 32nd minute with a nice finish. This put the Koreans down 3-1, and while they would find a goal in the second half stoppage time, the game finished 3-2 Turkey. South Korea had finished the tournament in 4th place, still miles ahead of where even the most optimistic fan must have thought possible, and still being much a springboard towards future success for the national team. South Korea would continue to be one of the major soccer powers in Asia and have made every World Cup since, but luckily for me, they haven't gone on another run like 2002 since. The reason why I say luckily for me is because I just spent nearly 2,000 words just on their 2002 run alone, and I still have 44 more of these to write and film, so we're going to be quick here and move on to the other 11 groups of teams we still have to cover. Qualifying for Germany 2006 started out with South Korea in a group with Lebanon, Vietnam, and the Maldives, and somehow the Koreans got dragged into 2 road draws in this group, but advanced to the final round anyways. Here they were grouped with Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and Uzbekistan, with the top two getting automatic tickets to the World Cup. The Koreans and Saudis clearly occupied those two spots the entire double round robin. Saudi Arabia may have finished first, but the Koreans were more than happy with second because it got them back to the World Cup again. In Germany, the Koreans would get drawn into a group with 1998 champs and 2002 crash-outs France, along with emerging defensive juggernauts Switzerland and debutantes Togo, who were going through a lot here. Their first game would be against Togo in Frankfurt, and this game was unexpectedly competitive. Togo had one of the most tumultuous trips to the World Cup, nearly not even going because of pay disputes and a whole bunch of nonsense, and their squad could charitably be described as Manuel Adebayor and just a bunch of other dudes. So yeah, it was quite unexpected when the Togolese took the lead in the 31st minute when Mohamed Kader totally robbed Kim Yong-chul blind and finished past Lee Woon-chae. Togo actually looked like the better team for a majority of this game, but everything changed when Jean-Paul Abalo picked up a second yellow in a professional challenge just outside the box. Lee Chun-soo hit the ensuing direct free kick, take another shot. Now Togo had not only blown their lead, but it was now at a man disadvantage for the rest of the game. This spurred the Koreans on to take the initiative, and in the 72nd minute, a familiar face stepped up. An Jung-hwan, the man that scored the golden goal to beat Italy, and then the next day had his contract terminated by Perugia, the Italian club that he played for. An Jung-hwan would have one more moment of World Cup glory when he blasted a shot from outside the box past Kasiagasa and into the back of the net for a Korean lead and eventually a Korean win. South Korea was on 3 points going into the jaws of this group. Next up was France and Leipzig, and this was the big one. If the Koreans could get a win here and scrap another European giant, they were going through to the knockouts. So of course they immediately went down 1-0 to a goal from the great Thierry Henry, and another Arsenal legend, Patrick Vieira, nearly made it 2-0 after a goal line clearance that looked to me like it was too late. The French would hold South Korea off all the way to the 81st minute when Seo Ki-hyun whipped the ball into the box for Cho Jae-jin, who headed the ball into the middle, and Park Ji-sung found it before William Gallas or the French defense finished it past Gallas and put South Korea level. The game finished 1-1. South Korea was now on 4 points and only behind Switzerland for first in the group on goal difference. Their last group game would be against those Swiss in Hanover, and this is where the rug finally got pulled from this magical side. The run back at World Cup glory had gone well so far, but this is where the cruelty of the World Cup was laid bare. South Korea completely no-showed in this game, with Switzerland dominating from beginning to end. Philippe Senderos scored early, Alexander Frey scored late, the Swiss dominated the tempo and possession in between, and just like that, with France beating Togo in the other game, South Korea was out. The fall from 4th place to being grouped in 4 years was kind of wild at the time, but it does make sense. We've seen teams fall from higher highs since and before, and this South Korea team, it did it on smoke and mirrors in 2002, so without the host advantage, this is actually low-key a respectable effort. They still got a win, they drew with the team that almost won the World Cup, and they ran into a mountain in Switzerland. It happens to the best of us. South Korea would move forward to South Africa 2010, ushering in a new era, one where Park Ji-sung is the definitive guy for the team moving forward. The dude was so consistent for a consistently good Manchester United team in Sir Alex's late years, and stepped into the leadership role well here. Qualifying South Korea get out of a group with North Korea ahead of Jordan and Turkmenistan. That got them to the final round, where they were once again grouped with North Korea, as well as Saudi Arabia, Iran, and the United Arab Emirates. It's a pretty tough group, all things considered, but South Korea once again would have no issue, going undefeated and taking first place in this group by 4 points. This got them to the first African World Cup, where they'd be put in a group with Messi's Argentina, a strong Nigeria team, and the remnants of the 2004 Euro winners, Greece. South Korea's first game in Koberka against Greece was an amazing start. The Koreans scored off a corner in the 7th minute, with center back Lee Jung-soo kicking it in to give the Koreans the early lead. The Greeks were famously defensive and thus not really equipped to deal with this kind of situation. The Koreans got the majority of the attacks from here, held their 1-0 lead at halftime, and doubled that lead early when Park Ji-sung dicked down their entire defense and finished past Alexandra Sorvas. South Korea won this 2-0 to give them a great platform to build on for qualifying to the knockouts. Game 2 at Soccer City in Johannesburg was a tall task against Argentina, and they went down pretty early on an own goal from a Messi free kick. Gonzalo Higuain made it 2-0 shortly after, but kind of out of nowhere, the Koreans did get one back before halftime when Lee Chung-yong absolutely mugged Martin Demichelis and scored in stoppage time. The game was 2-1 and South Korea actually had a great period of chance after chance in the second half to equalize, but the Argentines eventually put the game away with 2 Higuain goals for like the lamest World Cup hat trick ever, but a hat trick nonetheless. South Korea had lost 4-1, but the scoreline definitely did them a disservice. This loss didn't mean much either because Argentina was already winning this group. The goal was second place here and a spot in the knockouts, and that was still attainable with a result in their last game against Nigeria. Game 3 in Durban was a big one, and this was a fever dream. Both teams knew a win put them through in second, the Koreans knew a draw would also be enough for them, and the action played out on the pitch between 2 very different nations and teams. It's a delightfully World Cup kind of match, and the Koreans went down immediately when Chidi Odaya found Kalu Uche for the goal, not to be confused with Kaliuchi's of course. Tasting their own blood, especially after Nigeria hit the post, the Koreans would bounce back and score off a free kick, not directly this time, but through a header from Lee Jung-soo to equalize. On the other side of halftime, South Korea got another free kick, and this time it was scored directly by Park Chu-young to give South Korea the lead for the first time, also take a shot. The Koreans would hang on for dear life from here, benefiting from misses from Obafemi Martins and especially Yakubu, who missed an absolute sitter to equalize. He did get a chance to equalize from the spot though, and he converted to make it 2-2. The game finished here, and that was enough for South Korea, who finished ahead of both Nigeria and Greece to reach the knockouts on foreign soil for the very first time. As the second place team entering the knockouts, your fate is very much in the hands of the way the bracket shakes out, and while there are worse teams you could end up with than Uruguay, this also did mean South Korea was going up head-to-head against Luis Suarez, Diego Forlan, Edinson Cavani, so that's definitely not ideal. Park Chu-young began the game with a free kick attempt that hit the bar, but Uruguay found the lead just 8 minutes in when Jung Sung-ryong could grab the Forlan cross and went right in front of him, and Suarez was there to hit the angle into the open net. Uruguay would hold this lead well into the second half, but off a Korean free kick, the ball got sent into the box and Lee Chung-young was able to finish for the equalizer. This set up a dramatic final 20 minutes or so, where Suarez would come to his country's rescue with an amazing goal off a corner, bent in from the very outside edge of the box. Uruguay had the lead again, and they just held for the 2-1 win. It was a good effort for South Korea, but they were out in the round of 16, low-key further than most people thought they would go at this World Cup anyway. For Brazil 2014, qualifying began in a group with the UAE, Lebanon, and Kuwait, and despite losing to Lebanon on the penultimate match day, the Koreans would come out in first place and advance to the final group stage. Here they were drawn with Iran, Uzbekistan, Qatar, and Lebanon again. This was a very competitive top three, with Lebanon and Qatar being beached pretty early, but some missed opportunities from South Korea with a loss in Tehran and a draw in Beirut put South Korea in a vulnerable spot going into their penultimate game against Uzbekistan. A loss to the Uzbeks at home would be disaster, almost certainly condemning the Koreans to the third place playoff spot. Luckily, an Uzbek own goal in the 43rd minute proved to be the difference, and South Korea would finish in second place, even with the home loss to Iran in their last game. The Koreans were going to the World Cup again. I will say, this was a bit of a transition team for South Korea. Park Ji-sung's late career was racked with injuries, and he retired from the side after 2011. The best player on this team was a young Son Heung-min, who was still 21 at the time at the start of this tournament, and it was not fully fledged yet. Instead, the veteran presence on this team was guys like Park Chu-young and Ki Sung-hyung, and the captain Koo Ja-cheol. These are not bad players at all, but this South Korean team very clearly lacks the firepower from the sides of the 2000s and future South Korean sides will have. The good news is that Brazil handed them a good draw with unproven Belgium out of pot 1, unproven Russia as the other European team, and unproven Algeria out of North Africa, one of the most negative teams at the 2010 World Cup. South Korea could 100% make the knockouts out of this group. Game 1 in Cuiabá was against Russia, and this was kind of a dead game, unfortunately. The second half was a bit more action-packed than the first, which had straight up nothing. But South Korea would take the lead in the 68th minute when a long shot from Lee Kyun-ho should have been easily saved by Igor Akinfeev, but it went right through his hands instead. A horrible goalkeeping gaffe. Alexander Kurzhakov would equalize not long after, and this one would finish 1-1 all even. This put everything on Game 2 in Porto Alegre, a game against Algeria that ended up being a complete banger. Algeria would hit for not 1, not 2, but 3 first-half goals that should have put the game away. Son Heung-min would spring for his first ever World Cup goal here though, and it got down to 3-1. They damn near got a second back as well, if not for the excellent goal line clearance from Aissa Mandi. The Koreans really pushed here, but they got hit for a fourth goal by Yassin Brahimi that ended it. Kujachil would get one back, but this 6-goal banger ended 4-2 Algeria. It was a result that all but eliminated the Koreans from this World Cup. The final game in Sao Paulo against Belgium was low-key a dead rubber, but South Korea had a real chance to get the result on this one after the straight red card that sent Steven Defour off on the brink of halftime. The Belgians would hold out though, and they took the lead when Kim Sung-gyu in goal couldn't handle the shot from Divock Origi, and Belgian defender Jan Vertonghen was there for the tap-in. The game would finish 1-0 Belgium, meaning that South Korea was out at the bottom of the group, and they were one of the teams that made the least impact in Brazil at the end of the day. Qualifying for Russia 2018 saw South Korea win a group with Lebanon, Kuwait, Laos, and Myanmar to advance to the final group stage, where they were drawn with Iran, Uzbekistan, Qatar, China, and Syria. This was a bit of a stormy campaign, with the Koreans dropping some points late on, but they were still second place by the end, even after a cold streak, and so the Koreans were back at the World Cup once again. This time the group draw would do them no favors, handing them the holders Germany, the group stage experts Mexico, and a spry Swedish team. Game 1 in Nizhny Novgorod was against Sweden, and this was a cagey one. The Swedes had the better opportunities in this one, but neither team got off the ground until the second half, when Kim Min-woo brought down Victor Claesson and got caught by VAR. Ensuing penalty was buried by Andreas Granqvist, and the best Korean chance from here was bottled by Hwang Hee-chan. The game finished 1-0 Sweden, and this result put South Korea 1 foot in the grave. Next up was Mexico and Rostov-on-Don, a huge game, and I just have to say, I haven't mentioned the kits yet this video. I don't think South Korea normally has amazing ones, but these highlighter red-ass kits they whipped out in this game with the black shorts, these are sick as fuck. Unfortunately, they started poorly in this game, conceding another penalty early thanks to a handball in the box by Jang Hyun-soo, and Carlos Vela converted to make it a 1-0 Mexican lead. South Korea would push for an equalizer, but Mexico caught them on the break, and Chicharito made it 2-0 to put this one on ice. The Koreans would get one back in stoppage time on a banger of a goal scored by Sung Hyun-min, who by now is one of the best attacking players in the world and entering his prime with Tottenham. This wasn't enough, South Korea still lost, but it was a hell of a goal. Now on 0 points after 2 games and all but eliminated from contention, South Korea would face the holders Germany, who needed to beat the Tigers of Asia to advance to the knockouts as is German football birthright. Facing the prospects of a second straight World Cup where they wouldn't make any notable contributions to the tournament, South Korea showed the fuck out in a historic game in Kazan. The game started with Manuel Neuer bobbling a South Korean shot to nearly concede immediately. While he did recover this, it was a bad omen for the holders. Germany started getting more and more possession and more of the chances, but as the game went on and as the chances kept not being converted, nerves started fraying for the stereotypically ice-cold Germans. They started letting the Koreans break more often. They kept breaking their opportunities, and with Sweden beating Mexico in the other game, the Germans absolutely needed a breakthrough here to advance. Mats Hummels fucked up a late header by hitting it with his shoulder instead. His team was falling apart. Entering stoppage time still tied 0-0. Lee Jae-sung carried it down the pitch and won a corner. Off this corner, the ball bounced around and landed at the feet of Kim Young-won, who couldn't have had a simpler finish. He put the ball into the back of the net, and the goal was ruled offsides. VR had a look. He was definitely in an offsides position, but more importantly, the ball went through the legs of Germany's Niklas Süle and did hit Süle on the way through, negating the offsides. The refs made the call, the Koreans burst into joy, and the collapse was complete. Germany was going out of the World Cup. So was South Korea, of course, but that didn't matter. They took down the defending champs in a classic game no one would forget that watched, and shit, they even added a second goal with Neuer out of goal. Crazy, crazy stuff. We now shift to Qatar 2022, where South Korea would top our group with Lebanon again somehow, as well as Turkmenistan and Sri Lanka. This put them into a group with Iran, the UAE, Iraq, Syria, and guess who? Fucking Lebanon again, who I've mentioned way more in this video than I could have ever expected. South Korea dominated this group, winning 7 of their first 9 and going undefeated during this stretch. They occupied a top 2 spot the entire time and finished in second place ultimately to secure another bid to the World Cup. In Qatar, South Korea would be handed another tough draw, getting Ronaldo in Portugal, Suarez in Uruguay again, and Ghana out of Africa. Their first game in Al Rayyan was against Uruguay, and yikes. Both teams had chances. Uruguay actually hit the post twice, but South Korea just didn't see too much of the ball, and Uruguay did nothing with it. The game finished 0-0, keeping both teams steady heading into the second round of games. Staying at Education City Stadium, South Korea would take on Ghana, and South Korea went from boring 0-0 to a banger of a game. They went behind early when a Ghana free kick was put into the box, and in the ensuing shuffle, Mohamed Salisu put it into the back of the net for the Africans. They made it 2-0 not long after when Mohamed Kudus got on the other end of a brilliant cross from Jordan Ayew. The game got to halftime 0-0, but the second half would explode with action. Lee Kang-in subbed on and immediately put in a great cross to Cho Gui-sung, who got South Korea a goal back. Cho Gui-sung got a second goal right after, this time on a cross from Kim Jin-soo, and suddenly South Korea was back level. We've seen them fight back so many times during this video, but once again the rug was pulled out from under them, with Kudus scoring a second goal himself in the 68th minute to put the Black Stars back in the lead. After losing this one, South Korea's third match, also at Education City, saw the Taeguk Warriors take on Portugal in a must-win game where the Koreans also needed help from Uruguay. It started horribly, with Ricardo Horta scoring for the Lusitanians, but the Koreans would fight back in this one. They nearly scored if not for an offsides, but in the 27th minute, Kim Young-gwon would find a good equalizer from short range. Suddenly this was game, and the Portuguese didn't know how to respond. They were chilling at the top of this group and were already going through, but still, not a good look. The second half would continue with the score tied, and it looked like we were heading for another South Korean moral victory at the World Cup. At the beginning of the stoppage time, they would go on the break. Son Heung-min, wearing a face mask due to an eye injury and mostly quiet at this World Cup so far, broke forward alone. With only him running forward and Hwang Hee-chan busting forward along with 8 Portuguese players, Son had his amazing World Cup moment.
Still a lot to do. Son striding forward. Son still going. Support arriving. Oh, they've scored! They've only gone and done it! It's absolutely extraordinary!
This is absolute scenes. South Korea had sprung their second World Cup upset of Portugal, and unlike their awesome upset of Germany at 2018 at the same spot here, this was actually enough for South Korea to get through to the knockouts thanks to Uruguay winning 2-0 against Ghana and not 3-0. This was South Korea's first time they're through to the knockouts since 2010, but the bad news is that the set bracket set them up against Brazil. The Canary Yellow Soldiers of Brazil were coming off a shock loss to Cameroon in their final group game, and that made them appear vulnerable for this one. Nope. Brazil scored immediately through Vinicius Jr., and then in the 13th minute won a penalty. Neymar converted, it was already 2-0 at Brazil, and it got worse. Richarlison finished off an amazing team goal to make it 3-0. Lucas Paquetá also scored a great team goal to make it 4-0. Still not even halftime yet, Jesus Christ. This was a murder. And even though Paik Sung-hoo got a consolation goal in the 76th minute on a great goal from like 30 yards out, what a disappointing way to go out for South Korea. They just got eviscerated here. We move forward now with Son Heung-min aging and Lee Kang-in now clearly the player of the future for this team. And qualifying for North America 2026 saw South Korea put in a group with China, Thailand, and Singapore. They had no issue here, winning 5 of 6 and easily advancing to the final group stage as is their standard. Their group here would include Iraq, Jordan, Oman, Palestine, and Kuwait, no Lebanon this time. And once again, South Korea had no issue. They would go undefeated in their 10 games here, easily qualifying for what is now their 11th straight appearance at the World Cup. South Korea found out they would be playing in Mexico at least during the group stages of the 2026 World Cup, drawn into a group with the host Mexico along with South Africa and Czechia. I love how different these 4 teams are culturally, geographically, and as far as how they play soccer. South Korea has never played the Czechs in the World Cup, nor have they played South Africa, but they have quite a bit of history with Mexico. These two have almost this Manchester City QPR-esque relationship, with South Koreans having done the Mexicans 2 solids over the years. Since this is the last video I'm doing for a Group A team, I'll drop my real quick predictions. I have Mexico winning their opener against South Africa, with the Czechs and South Koreans drawing in the other game. I have both second matchday games ending in draws, with Czechia versus South Africa drawing 1-1 and South Korea drawing 2-2 with Mexico. I then have South Korea winning 2-0 against South Africa to win the group, Czechia winning against Mexico to get second, and Mexico finishing 3rd place on 4 points, almost definitely going through as one of the best 3rd place teams. I really could see South Africa going through as well. It's insane to me how wide open this group is. That's team number 4 of 48 done, and one of 12 groups completely run through. I had a lot of fun with this one, even though it was stressful as hell. Getting the 2002 run right and doing it justice was tough as someone who was 5 years old when it happened. I also talked about how South Korea is one of those exotic teams that I just didn't know a whole lot about going into this making of this video. It's been real though. I hope you all are enjoying and stick around for the rest of the series. Tomorrow we go from a team with a ton of history at the World Cup to one with very little at all. Get ready to learn Canadian because we're talking about the second co-hosts, the Hockey Men, the Maple Warriors, Canada.